Welcome to Overtime a Days, where we talk about relevant construction topics in the industry today. We got a special treat today. We've got Kyle Thacker with us. Kyle, thanks for coming.
Appreciate you having me.
So today we are talking about commissioning. And if you guys have read any of the articles on our website, you can go to the toolbox on our website. We have all of our archive of articles. Kyle actually wrote the article about commissioning. So we were able to bring him in today, figured who better to talk about this than the person that wrote the article. So why don't you first just give us a brief overview of what commissioning actually is?
Yeah, so I mean, when we're talking about commissioning, you've done all the construction, right? We're 75, 80% complete.
Yep.
This is okay, now do all of our grills, registers, diffusers, are all those outputs maintaining the way that they need to be? Are all your appliances, your technical equipment, HVAC units, basically are all of these systems and things that we've built over the last however long your project is, we're checking to make sure, number one, that it's installed correctly, right? And number two, that it's actually meeting the design requirements. Obviously, if you hire a contractor to go build you an auditorium, right, and they put you a 5-ton air handler unit up there, that's nowhere near going to service it, right? So yeah, that's a gross oversimplification, but the same principle stands.
So in that instance, your commissioning is you're making sure that what's put in place for the HVAC handler unit, for instance, is actually doing what it's supposed to do at the capacity it's supposed to be at to service what the owner actually needs it to service.
100%. Because in that same vein, okay, if you had a piece of equipment, its optimal efficiency was at like a 50% power requirement. But again, it was, say the unit was sized too small, you have to run it more. So now we're at, 70 or 80% of that power usage. Now, over a 10-year lifespan, that owner is going to be paying exorbitant amount of money just to keep that thing running when you could pay more for a different unit that's more energy efficient.
Gotcha.
So different applications of that.
Talking specifically on types of commissioning, we've got fundamental commissioning, enhanced commissioning, and ongoing commissioning. Hit a little bit on those and what those are.
Yeah, so fundamental is pretty much it's kind of what everybody thinks of when you talk about the commissioning piece. It's very bare bones. It's very much what we said before: grills, registers, and diffusers, equipment, things like that.
Strictly requirements.
Strictly requirements.
Yeah.
What did we have to put in place here to get the owner what they want?
Okay.
The second category there, when
enhanced,
talking about enhanced, we start to see it a lot more when it comes towards, again, the new energy requirements, right?
Kind of what you just the example you just gave.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a lot of it is tied around, some of it could be LEED standards and things like that. Like, are we actually using, and is that system performing in a way that's sustainable to the environment? What's our outputs? Like all of these type things. So that enhanced commissioning level goes just a step further to say, what are we looking at in terms of life cycle costs, in terms of environmental impact, in terms of take your pick. It's just a next level beyond
the fundamental. And then ongoing commissioning, which is a little bit self-explanatory.
True. Yeah. But that's one thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about it here in just a minute, but ongoing commissioning too is so important, because a lot of times contractors specifically will just think about commissioning for their first, they're like their warranty period. They'll come in there after a 1-year warranty. They'll make sure that everything is basically still performing the way that it needs to. You might have a contract requirement to come back later after the fact, but let's just say, for example, you're a design build contractor, making sure that your design team is building in the requirements to do that ongoing phase.
Right.
It seems simple, but oftentimes too, if an owner doesn't necessarily know to think about it, if you as a contractor, it's something that can be missed.
Yeah, when we were talking offline earlier about this, when I was thinking, when you were talking about the different requirements and why you had put those in the article and how interesting those actually were, the whole time I was sitting there thinking, man, a lot of projects we work on, the commissioning is a huge holdup at the end of the project, and ends up costing a whole bunch of money because the contractor wasn't necessarily thinking that far ahead. They weren't thinking about that at the beginning. They're like, we'll get to it when we get to it.
Yeah.
But, and that's something that we're trying to hit on with all of our clients right now specifically is, hey, either get somebody that can help you or we can help you with it, but somebody needs to help with this because you're going to end up killing this project and getting all the way to the end, and then it's going to come to a screeching halt because you didn't have a commissioning agent ready to go or 100 different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And something you just said there reminded me too. I believe it was, I forget the executive order that was put in place, but like thinking about like contractors, say you're on an IDIQ contract, right? They have to hold you to some standard, right? So that's your UFC codes, your ASHRAE, whatever. But in the middle of that, say if it's a 5-year IDIQ, you could run into different changes in regulatory requirements altogether. And so you might have bid, you might have bid a project 2 or 3 years ago, and now there's an entirely different spin on what the environmental regulations are, what the co-compliance, like a lot of that stuff can change too. And so to your point about people kind of forgetting about it, they might not even have forgot about it, but the literal benchmark may have changed over that time. And
that's a good point.
That could be, that's something that if you're not dialed in,
if you're not dialed in, that's problematic.
That's
quickly can become problematic.
Yeah.
So I think people can probably put 2 and 2 together, but let's talk a little bit about why commissioning is so important.
Okay.
So you've got we just talked about compliance with the federal standards. And then what about reduced risk?
Yeah. So, I mean, reduced risk, that's huge, right?
Sure.
I would say that of all the people that I've worked with, just in terms of general contractors and even doing owner's rep services and things like that, everybody wants to make sure that whatever decision gets made is not going to come back to bite them in the hind end a year, or 2 years, 5 years down the road. So, a lot of it comes down to really having the design team aligned with the end user, with whatever that is. And for them to be really weighing, what is almost building in some redundancy there, right? So we
multiple checks,
multiple checks, but also too multiple evaluation points throughout the whole process. So that, let's just say something happens. Let's say you're building a factory and whatever, some massive change occurs internally for your product line, however it is that you want it ran. You don't want to have to completely re-engineer the building to suffice for that change. Well, I think again, for me, HVAC units make the most sense. But it's like if you can mitigate your risk in selecting the appropriate equipment, you might be able to almost have a multi-use space as opposed to a very specific use case.
Yeah.
Right. And then, when it comes time to actually commission the equipment and figure out what's going on, you're able, as the end user, to kind of run those numbers and be like, well, okay, we've operated this way for the last 5 years, and say we need to make a change or we need to do something like that. Like you can almost adjust course without having to truly revamp and redefine all of your specific components.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
okay. Yeah, I mean, well, that greatly reduces your risk.
Well, that's like a long-term risk. And then, like in the short term, it's the same things that everybody always typically is dealing with.
Right, you're covering your butt because you got commissioning reports saying that everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. So if the owner tries to come back later and say, yeah, this wasn't what we wanted, you can say, well, this is what it was spec'd out to be. We did all the commissioning tests. It is. So
exactly.
Sorry.
So compliance with manufacturer's warranties, compliance with installation requirements, all that stuff. Once you hit substantial completion, all that stuff now kicks in, right? Things are starting to change hands and people are starting to get real squirrely about stuff.
Then leads into O&Ms and everything like that.
So, it's from your risk perspective. I worked on a project one time, came in at the end. There were some issues with it was a control unit. It was a control systems for, I want to say it was like a hospital. And it was the hospital or classroom. I can't remember exactly which one it was. But in regard to that, when we came in, they were trying to figure out how the two would integrate with each other, like how the control package would integrate with the rest of the buildings. We had one warranty for the controls, one warranty for some of the equipment, and because one of the other one couldn't be verified, it fell back on the contractor to it was a weird use case. But I'm saying again, back to your point about like risk mitigation.
Yeah.
Getting those things in order is so critical because it's just you're at the end of the job. Everybody's moving.
It's the last thing you want to really be having to worry about is something necessarily like that. Yeah. And then obviously we've got improved performance. We just talked about that.
Correct.
And then lower long-term costs, which we also just talked about at the beginning. So I didn't know you were going to just hit all my questions.
Well, no. That's like, that is addressing risk management from their perspective.
Yeah.
It's very multifaceted to where it's not just, that's to your point.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into that.
Sure. And then, so now that we obviously talked about what commissioning is, we talked about why it's important, what can contractors do to prepare themselves for those commissioning requirements?
So there's a lot. There's a lot to go into.
Very loaded question there. But you don't got to go into all of it. We can just hit the highlights.
Yeah. So initially I would say having a real working relationship with your commissioning agent, getting them involved as early as possible. If it's something, depending on the contract, if it's
which it's most of the time it's third party.
Most of the time it's third party. Bring them in. Most people, that's the last thing they want is to have somebody else coming in there and asking questions and doing all.
Getting in the way.
Yeah. We're
before it's their time.
Exactly. So my advice would be to embrace that because you're really just setting yourself up for failure if you don't bring them in.
There's another mitigation of risk. If you bring them into some meetings prior to, for instance, they may catch something that nobody thought of and be like, well, what about this? And then that could end up being the make or break of saving you a ton of time or maybe even a ton of rework.
Yeah, exactly. And, those folks make money for a reason.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? They absolutely do. So I would say do that for one. And then the second piece would be, I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it where people just don't allocate enough time throughout the schedule to actually incorporate the test and inspections, the revisions. They don't build in any redundancy for themselves to actually, like, because a lot of times you would think, well, okay, my subcontractor, they're going to provide me with a schedule. They're going to have that built in, right? There's a lot of assumptions there. Another risk. Did they actually include for a week's worth of time to go around and check all of my whatever fixtures?
Sure.
Right. And so if you as the GC, if you're taking that into consideration, that's another key piece because that also plays into, we were talking offline, just overall workflows for the contractor. How do things pass through different hands and stuff like that?
Which leads me into commissioning plan.
Yes.
I think that ultimately, that's if you're saying how can a contractor be best prepared, obviously you got to have a commissioning plan and it's got to be a pretty detailed one to ensure that you're not missing anything because you're going to be worried about 100 different things when it comes to this piece. Because obviously there's also going to be other things going on while this commissioning is happening.
Absolutely. And, I know we help contractors all the time with their, with submittal assistance, with figuring stuff like that out. That's when you address it is early on, right? Again, early, get ahead of it and integrate that into that plan. Not enough could be said for that specifically, just because even if it's not a plan that you have to submit to the owner or they would probably require you to have
government for sure.
Government for sure.
Yeah.
But even if nobody says, I don't care about your plan at all, for your benefit, you need one.
Right. Absolutely.
For your benefit, you need one.
Now, one thing that will 100% have to be submitted regardless is the inspections.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about, if this sounds obvious, preparing for inspections.
That's not obvious. I mean, it is obvious, but it's
on the surface maybe.
On the surface, maybe. I mean, like we talk about energy efficiency.
Yep.
We talk about when an electrical engineer goes in, they outline all of the, again, what's the end use case for this system? What's the optimal rate, power usage, whatever. If you're not taking into consideration those inspections at different points throughout the overall process, it's probably worthwhile to call out like the USACE 3-phase QC portion, right?
Yep.
Preparatory initial follow-up phase.
Yep.
Mirroring your test and inspection schedule in line with that is going to give you a lot of flexibility and a lot of capability, because like even the most simple cases where let's just say, again, you're 85% complete the contract, maybe a subcontractor nicks a wire, nicks something completely, in that case you would say it goes on a punch list. But it's like some minor detail, you being able to pinpoint, okay, from week to week, from month to month, go ahead and establishing that baseline for your tests will give the commissioning portion a whole lot more continuity. You can maybe even troubleshoot issues.
I got
in a little bit, in a more accurate way, because you've been diligent, because you've been actually putting that in place. I know they're showing up next week to do this. Okay, well, what are my records? Well, okay, he's going to run and do his test. I would like to show him, here's the data that I've been picking up for the last X amount of days.
Which all goes back to planning.
Yeah.
Which you hit on and made it super apparent that that's super important. But everything you're saying right there, it all circles itself back to planning so far as to the inspections. Because if you're trying to schedule out inspections a couple of days before you're hoping that something like that's going to get done, you're going to be out of luck.
100%.
You're going to be out of luck.
Yeah.
Because number one, especially if it's a third party, because you're dealing with a subcontractor.
Can they get out of here?
Yeah, like where are they out? Where are they out of? What manpower do they have? What if they've got other jobs? That sort of stuff. So being able to get somebody on the books like that, and you're also, I feel like too, from a certain point, if you know that that's scheduled and you know that they're coming out there that day, I feel like that also gives your guys, your crews, your people a target of knowing I got to have it done by this time. So you really can't let anything slip through the cracks there. So a little bit of good pressure may be put on them there as well.
Yeah, it starts to show up in their 2-week look aheads. It starts to show up and now we've got accountability, because everybody's
like,
seen
this can't change. We got this.
It can't change.
Yeah.
We all know that they're showing up and this has to hit. So what are we doing?
So to kind of wrap this up, if somebody was, let's say this is their first job where they got to do commissioning on something, what are key takeaways from this, key takeaways from the article that you had written, and really key takeaways that, like, if you guys called us, we would probably be telling you, hey, this is what you got to do if you want to be successful with your commissioning. Because, I mean, this stuff happens. We know that.
Yes.
Nothing.
The best plans in the world.
Yeah, construction projects are construction projects. There's a reason why the most money is spent in construction in any industry, because it just, stuff happens.
Yes.
But ensuring that you're properly prepared for that. What would you tell somebody if they called and said, Kyle, commissioning, what do I need to do to best prepare myself for this?
I think early engagement with the commissioning authority, whoever that is, you want to be on a good working relationship with them. You want to integrate what we hit around this, but you're integrating commissioning into your overall workflow process.
Yep.
Right? How do we tackle that in a way that we communicate to everybody? Here's the expectation. Here's what we're trying to target. Right? Which ties into the scheduling piece. Make sure that as we're thinking about whatever it is that we have to deliver for our end user, we're building enough time in there to meet the compliance, the compliance, the testing, reporting, all those standards, but also addressing any changes, giving us an appropriate buffer in that amount of time. And then, I would say probably just the last thing is when you're developing your commissioning plan, making sure that your submittals are, you put the same amount of effort into the early phase as you do in the later phase. So again, taking everything that I know right now about my submittal process, incorporating that into the plan, incorporating that, making it a holistic approach so that there's no ambiguities. You know what I'm saying? There's no, like, again, it's going to vary depending on what the project is. But at the end of the day, if you're doing those steps and you're thinking about it in that way, I mean, even one thing we didn't talk about was even just the training. Say, are we training, the building maintenance folks in person? Are we doing it on video?
Again, with the planning and scheduling out. Yeah.
So, just taking that one piece at a time. It's how do you need an elephant? One bite at a time, right? Yeah. It's a huge piece, a huge task. So making a process for you and your company that's scalable, repeatable, and as efficient as possible. That would be my.
Okay. No, I love it. I love it. And for anybody that's watching, if you need help with commissioning, we'd be more than happy to. Kyle's a phone call away. Call us. We'd be more than happy to assist in any way that we can. Or if you wanted us to just take care of it and you said, Josh, I don't even want to think about this. We just want you guys to take care of it. We have a whole entire project controls team that does front end and back end, so we can definitely help with that if that is necessary to do so. As always, thank you guys for watching. Shameless plug to Kyle. He just did a webinar. Was it last week we did the webinar or 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. If you haven't, subscribe to our YouTube channel, ACE Consulting's YouTube channel, because we do have obviously all of these. We also have our president, Matt Ellis's podcast, Building Success, and then a lot of host of trainings and training series. And then we're doing webinars bi-monthly, and Kyle just did our second one, and that just got posted a couple of days ago. So that is up now as well. So we've got 2 of those on our new webinar series as well. So Kyle, thank you so much, man.
Thank you for having me, man.
Much appreciated. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.